Good afternoon and welcome to another OhioX Tech Tour series event. We're really excited to be talking with Columbus-based technology and innovation professionals. Thank you to everyone who has joined this one and who has been joining throughout the start of this series. For those of you that aren't familiar, I am Chris Berry, president of OhioX. OhioX is a statewide technology and innovation partnership. And the goal of this Tech Tour series is to help promote, connect, and share the stories of incredible work in the technology and innovation spaces that are happening in the state of Ohio by so many incredible Ohioans. Today, we're joined by four leading technology and innovation experts in different fields from really different backgrounds. And that's part of this tour, so we can examine a whole host and range of what's happening in this space across Ohio. Before I begin, I want to thank HMB, who is the sponsor of the Tech Tour series. HMB helps mid-market companies and governments innovate and grow using cloud platforms and automation. HMB believes that you don't have to have a bottomless IT budget to reach your full potential. If you're interested in learning more about HMB, please visit their website at hmbnet.com. Now we're gonna do a quick intro of those that are on the line. We'll start with Ben Blanquera. Ben is vice president at COVAIL and founder of Tech Life Columbus. COVAIL was recently rebranded from the Columbus Collaboratory. They make intelligent operations a reality with proven experts, intelligent automation, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and collaboration. And also, if you think of tech in Ohio or you talk to anyone in tech in Ohio, they're probably going to ask first or second question, do you know Ben? So I think a great way to kick off today's event in this series here in Columbus is with Ben, if you want to share a little bit about who you are and what you work on.
Sure. Chris, first of all, thanks for having me on here, and I'll make sure I send the $20 bill for the nice intro to you. Look at it for in my Venmo. That being said, I'm thrilled to be here today. I represent sort of a couple of different facets here. I am in a tech startup today that is focused on sort of taking cost and risk out of system using AI, machine learning, and cyber. So that's pretty exciting. I've been around town here for about 20 odd years, being the local sort of tech evangelist. And as part of that, the Tech Life sort of community, we've been able to grow, I think, the largest tech community here in Ohio. We got close to 10,000 people actively engaged, 20 meetups all the time. And one of the things that is always top of mind for me is that the amount of talent in our cities is amazing if we can just actually get them to actually know each other and actually share that information. And so that's the premise here with today that I'm excited about, is just sharing the stories. Because once you can hear a story and get a little bit of education and inspiration, it's amazing what we can do.
Yeah, very much agree. And thank you, Ben, for being here and all that you've done for the Columbus community and welcoming so many of us, myself included, as we've gotten involved over time. Next up is Jay Clouse. Jay is the host of Upside, a podcast about investing outside of Silicon Valley. And he's also the executive producer of a recent film called Test City USA, a film about the growing startup and technology scene in Columbus. Jay, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris. Would like to say that I know Ben, just like everybody else in Columbus. Yeah, it's great to be here. I think where I can add most of the discussion here is just talking about Columbus as it relates to other cities, because on our show Upside, we talk to cities across the country, and I've gotten a really good look at being able to compare our city here to other tier 2 and even tier 3 cities across the country. And the film, thanks for giving it a nod, was something we made last summer with a student from Ohio State. Really proud of that also. And so if this conversation resonates with you, would love for you to check it out.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jay. Next up, we have Tonja Coverdale, PhD, who is Associate Vice President for Workforce and Legal Technology at Nationwide. She was also most recently the Chief Information Officer at Central State University, has had a really interesting career that's been across multiple cities, multiple states in the technology space, big corporations, higher education, and also down in the Caribbean islands. So a lot of perspective bringing to that. And Tonja was also the 2019 Central Ohio Tech Executive of the Year. So welcome and thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to also say, I know Ben. I think that's how we have to kind of start a event. It's great. So excited to be here representing Columbus today and in my new role at Nationwide. So one of the first talks that I'm doing outside of higher ed. So I'm really excited to dive into seeing how all the topics relate to what I'm doing now. But love Columbus so much. As you mentioned, I've lived in many, many different cities on the East Coast, where I'm originally from, and also in the Caribbean. And Columbus is by far my favorite tech community, and that is exactly why I'm here. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Our pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And then last up, but certainly not least, is Cheryl Turnbull. Cheryl is a senior director for venture capital and new ventures at The Ohio State University. She works with their Center for Entrepreneurship, the Technology Commercialization Office, working with inventors, entrepreneurs, and capital providers to create exciting startup companies and offering cutting edge technology that will change the world. And certainly, whether you're here in Columbus or anywhere across the world, when you think of Columbus, when you think of Ohio, one of the first things that come to mind for probably anyone, even people that aren't from here or even Americans, is Ohio State and Buckeyes. So I don't know, Cheryl, if you can answer what the football season is going to look like, but hopefully you can share some information about what's happening in the tech space with us today. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you including me on this. And unfortunately, I know much, I think we can predict the future of tech much more clearly than we can predict the future of the current football season, unfortunately. I recently took on a new role at Ohio State as the executive director of the Keenan Center for Entrepreneurship. And that includes entrepreneurial support resources for faculty, staff, students, and alumni. So all of Buckeye Nation, connecting them with their technology and incredible ideas with talent in the form of management teams or internships or mentors, as well as capital. The Ohio State University Board of Trustees set aside $100 million back in 2012 to invest in a variety of funds that support our economic ecosystem. So it has a development purpose as well as a return focused purpose, so that our entrepreneurs here in Ohio know that when they have a great idea or a fabulous technology, that there is access to capital. There may not be, there may not be a line for people ready to write you a check, but you don't have to go to the coast. If you have a good idea and a good management team and a well-defined value proposition, there is access to capital here in Columbus.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on the new role. It's been fun to see what the center's doing, because again, Ohio State is such a bedrock within our community and a leader. So excited to see what you and the team grow it into.
We're excited to see that too.
Yeah, I bet. We'll start with this, and Ben will kind of go with you, and then Jay, and kind of doing around the horn as we did for this to start. But COVID-19 is certainly something top of mind for everyone. We're all it's impacted everyone. Companies, organizations within a matter of days, very unexpectedly, had to shift to remote work. And this event here, all five of us on that are speaking we're all Columbus based, and normally these types of events and gatherings would be in person, and then perhaps have that broadcasting component for people around the state that are also joining us today. But how have either your companies, your businesses, those that you interact with, what has it been like these past few months? And what are you seeing? And I know, Ben, some of the work you do with CIOs is that you recently also surveyed some CIOs at companies of all, I'm sure, shapes and sizes to see what that return looks like.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a couple things. We're seeing in broad sense because of the we don't know what's going to happen, and hence consequently the economic sort of landscape is unknown. That we're seeing a pretty significant sort of like, let's slow down spending any money, right? In sort of other than things that have to do with pivoting with. In sort of like, how do you still serve customers given all the constraints around how you serve customers? And so we're seeing some companies make some significant investment in sort of like, how do you go remote first, and how do you do that well? And so we're seeing an upsurge in that, and we're seeing some pretty significant sort of like rethinking of policy and culture that says, do we even need to be here, or do we start with a remote first culture? And that's caused a lot of angst, because the reality that it's not a technology issue, it's a culture issue. And we're seeing a lot of companies having to deal with sort of the culture issues that, how do we take advantage of this? So we're seeing that our company as a whole, we have fully embraced it. We've gone from as I was sharing with you earlier, this notion of, oh my God, when is this going to end, to, hey, there's some really good stuff that can happen as a result of this. Let's lean into that. While at the same point, let's make sure we pay attention to things that makes remote first work, which is our culture. And then I think that's sort of the biggest sort of challenge we're seeing with a lot of companies is in a remote first kind of world. Once you get past the, this is not going to end, let's just fully embrace it and make the most of it. And so what's really exciting is when I see around town is a level of like, what opportunities are being created now. And there's a ton of them. There's a ton of new opportunities being created. And so that's pretty exciting to us.
That's great. Well, thank you, Ben. And Jay, I'd be interested in your perspective, because you work with a lot of startups or independent creators, which probably have a lot more flexibility than a Nationwide in Ohio State, where there can be tens of thousands of associates across the country. But maybe a perspective on what this might mean for ecosystem building, because Columbus, and you've worked with Test City USA to tell that story. What are you seeing around the country of cities, startups, and what has it been like in that COVID-19 response?
Well, I see things all over the board here because I work with a lot of small business owners, which sometimes are brick and mortar, sometimes are freelancers, and some freelancers are totally unaffected. In fact, they're doing really well because they had already built their business to be virtual. And some are having a really tough time because they were based around events like photographers and videographers. And so they're having to rethink how they do their operations digitally and virtually. I can tell you podcasting advertising took a pause in Q2 of 2020. But from an ecosystem and startup standpoint, what we're seeing is some good things and some bad things. It's catalyzing more equity in terms of founders across the country being able to access larger investors, because investors in San Francisco are no longer as staunch of needing you to go to their office to pitch them. They are willing to do things over Zoom, which I think will long-term be a really great systemic change that we'll see, so that there are more opportunities for really great founders and really great companies across the country to have these pitch meetings that historically they've had to pick up and basically deploy themselves to the Valley for a couple of weeks or a couple of months to have those meetings. So that's really good. But we're also seeing that investors seem more interested in deploying their capital into quote unquote even safer companies that have already raised some capital, already have some traction. They're willing to even invest at slightly higher valuations than before because they just want to get money into companies that feel safer. They're doing less of the seed, pre-series A type stuff. So on one hand, I think it's really good because finally ecosystems across the country feel like they're on more of a level playing field. But, you know, like I said, the flip side is there's not as much risk capital being deployed right now.
Thank you for that, Jay. Tonja, and I know Nationwide was very, very leading in the response and some of those early decisions of what, you know, the future of work for Nationwide associates and returning to work looks like. But you bring a perspective working in one of the largest companies in America, a Fortune, I believe, 75 even company. So what has it been like, both the initial impact of COVID and then now that folks are returning? I think you might even be in the office today.
Yes. So let me say that I get to see this from the eyes of a technologist that's actually working actively within Nationwide on how do we adjust to the current situation. So my role is I am leading all the workforce and legal technologies. And so that encompasses technologies relating to human resources and corporate real estate. So when you think about the intersection of human resources and corporate real estate, that's pretty much everything that's going on right now. So from day one, I was thrust into this new, how do we take this very traditional insurance company and how do we mobilize it for the new beyond 21st century? Because I don't think anybody was really ready for this level of technology integration and engagement that we'll have to implement at this point to be able to move forward. So as you mentioned, Nationwide was definitely on the forefront of saying, let's rethink this. We have all of these corporate campuses across the country. Do we really need to bring everyone back? And this is, months ago. And so the footprint has been reduced, not workforce, but the footprint, meaning we are now having associates who would traditionally work in a corporate space who are going to be 100% work from home. So what does that mean? Because obviously the Nationwide experience has to remain the same. So not only the systems that you need to do your work, but how do we continue to have this culture permeate through technology's culture of Nationwide that has been strong for so long. And if you know anyone at Nationwide, it's very much about this, the culture of Nationwide. So I'm really excited in my role because not only am I getting to look at the systems of supporting people doing work, but also as a technologist who has studied academically the intersection of people and culture and technology. Now, how do we have these Zoom meetings or Teams, which is what we're implementing now, and how do we preserve the essence of who we are representationally as people of Nationwide, associates of Nationwide, and also do it from afar. So the response has been very overwhelming in terms of people wouldn't think that Nationwide or companies such as Nationwide would embrace the virtual world, but we've dove in, just all the way. And that is what makes it exciting. The ability for a company like Nationwide to pivot quickly, early, really should give way for other companies to show the same level of flexibility and adaptability to be able to meet this. I wouldn't even call it a challenge. I call it an opportunity. I think I've been waiting pretty much all my career to be able to help a traditional space work like this. Startups do this all the time. So startups have been doing flex work, remote work, hybrid work from the beginning of startup tech time. And that's normal in tech firms, but it can be normal and it really does work. So my job is to help Nationwide to make sure that everyone feels supported and that it can and will work.
That's great. Thank you. And I think also a little alluding to it, but you also started your new job in the middle of this, which is an experience of in itself, I'm sure.
I did. And so I'm thinking, hey, I'm like a test case study for all of this. So definitely a fun opportunity. I am probably one of the only people coming to work every day like, yes, like this is so good. I get to figure this out. Love it.
That's great. Thank you. And Cheryl at Ohio State, certainly higher education, which has, so much of it is in person and collaboration and learning. What has it been like over these past few months and as we look forward into a new school year that's coming up?
Well, it was sort of surprising. We all sort of left on spring break and we didn't know we weren't coming back. So there wasn't that opportunity to really kind of have closure and say goodbye. But I think we walked into this with a fair amount of kind of uncertainty and trepidation. And I'm with Tonja. This has presented so many different opportunities that I think we are really excited. So, for example, at the Keenan Center for Entrepreneurship, we went from serving just our 7,000 faculty to now serving 7,000 faculty, 65,000 students, and over 500,000 living alumni. So we were already looking at how do we scale that? And this virtual environment really is the way to get that done. And all of a sudden, instead of us pushing that technology out, everyone's already engaged. I mean, we were just so lucky that this technology already existed and all we had to do was take advantage of it. So it was, I think, as everyone sort of talked about, this is a cultural change for everyone. But what's nice is it's not being, like the Keenan Center doesn't have to push this. This is something everyone's being pulled in to do in order to stay connected and to maintain their culture, because this whole the whole idea of staying connected, and we're using Teams too, Tonja, in terms of just staying connected, being able to see the people that you work with every day, and being able to keep up to speed on what's going on in their life. That's an important part of the working relationship. But it's also, you know, when I look at it from the startup point of view, it's also challenging a number of our startups to say, okay, how do we take advantage of this new world? For example, all day today, with the exception of this lunch hour, I'm on a investor conference where we're having one-on-ones with just a series of investors for 20 minutes where we're doing pitches. And it's throughout the Midwest, and there's like 16 universities involved. We pulled this off in like a month or two. And like normally that would have been a huge event. We have a startup company who is able to, through an app on their phone, is able to give you, is able to serve the same function as an autorefractor and a digital cover test, meaning an eyeglass prescription. And originally, when we first started talking about this technology, the optometrists were very against this. They did not want to have their giant investment in the autorefractor taken away from them. They didn't want consumers feeling like they could use their phone to get an eyeglass prescription and not go to the optometrist. Of course, optometrists are still needed to, and the phone was simply, and the app was simply a tool. Well, now in the COVID days, the optometrists are all over this. They're like, how do we continue to see patients remotely? And so we are enabling them to operate a business model that they hadn't even contemplated before. So I just think that this era has just been full of very, very exciting opportunities. And I kind of like that whole brain challenge of how do you make it happen in this new environment? So I have to say, I think this has been really fun.
Well, that's great to hear, and I think that's a good segue into the next area of discussion. Is in OhioX, we have this opportunity to talk with people across the state, and we're even talking with people in other states, learning how they've built communities and what their tech sectors look like. And something to Columbus's credit, one of the first things that comes up very often is just the strength of this tech community that has been built over time, and it's no small part to organizations like Ohio State and Nationwide, entrepreneurs and creators that, you know, Jay works with. And then Ben, we can start with you again. You were part of a group that founded this Tech Life Columbus, which is really, I think, played it's played a massive role in what the evolution and growth of Columbus's tech scene has looked like. And on this, in this event today, we have people joining us, not just from Columbus, but across the state. And there's a lot of, interest of how that came about, what that's looked like over time. And so, Ben, maybe if you could share a little bit about how that collaboration started, and where it's grown to today.
Sure. So one of the things that, when I plopped down in Columbus, 1997, I had no idea where I was, other than, New Albany was starting. There's lots of picket fences and that I was out in the sticks. Little did I know that that I was getting plopped into a place where you had large corporations really cared about making Columbus better. In contrast to companies where there are headquarters in cities, they just are headquartered there, but they don't feel like they own what's happening here. That doesn't happen here. You have companies like Nationwide, Worthington, L Brands, right? These are pillar companies that not only they're headquartered here, but they're Columbus companies, and they take that seriously. And so it's a well-known case study that there's a thing called the Columbus Way, that there is a significant amount of, let's figure out how to make Columbus better in all sorts of ways. And so they literally have pooled all their energy resources into a sort of a balanced sort of approach to let's make Columbus grow. So the starting point is we have a group of folks that care about let's make everything better, whether it's economic development, whether it's arts, whether it is this digital divide, all of it matters. And so we've got sort of long running sort of support at a corporate level around let's do the right things. In my ecosystem, I've been engaged with In 1999, a bunch of CIOs led by a guy named Angelo Mazzacco said, what happens if we work together? Because we got this Y2K thing. Guess what? 20 years later, we got about 170 CIOs in that group. We've been meeting once a month for 20 years. That we are the longest running technology leadership group in the country. And that doesn't just happen. It happens because we've got this spirit of folks. It starts with people who care. That's it. It really starts with people who care, that says, there are things that we can do together, and that there are folks willing to do the heavy lifting or organizing. The folks in this room or on this call, they organize a lot of things. And so, we've been very lucky around it. What's happening now with Tech Life 12 years ago, I grew up in the world of Cliff Notes, which says, yes, I shouldn't say this, but perhaps I didn't read every book I should have in high school, and that Cliff Notes was my friend. And when I came to town, I said, it's really hard. You hear all these great assets, all this cool stuff going on, but there's no freaking Cliff Notes. There's no simple way for me to decipher what's going on here in this region. And so, we set out about a dozen years ago, my wife and I, around helping solve the problem, making it easy for people to know what's going on, how to get engaged, right? That's really it. Just like every startup, you have one thing you do really well. And the theory here in community building, I read this book literally 15 years ago. It says, look, if there's a couple of things that happen to create a strong community. One, there's got to be exchange. Stuff needs to be exchanged. One party needs to benefit from talking to another, and we have to create exchange. And two, energies at the fringes. What does that mean? That means if you're talking to the same people all the same time, you're not creating a vibrant community. And that there's an active outreach function that each of us has to do in order to bring new folks into the fold. So if we bring new folks in the fold and create the opportunity for them to do good things will happen. If we say we're just going to talk to the same people all the time, guess what? You're going to get stale really fast. And so those are a couple of things that I think about around that. And then the last piece that we're doing right now is, let's make sure that we think about our ecosystem as an iceberg. Above the waterline are all the folks you hear about. The majority of the folks in this community are underneath the waterline. Is you don't know who they are. They're individuals. They're not companies. They're individuals. And so when we think about organizing mechanisms, it has to do with how do we outreach to individuals and get individuals engaged, not companies engaged. So that's a little bit of sort of the thing here. And we're just thrilled that, we have literally 30 tech conferences. I counted. There are literally 30 tech conferences every year in Columbus, Ohio. In 3 years, we built one of the largest women in analytics conferences in the world. That doesn't just happen. People think it's just magical. Believe me, it doesn't just happen. And it's just a function of all the greatness that's sitting here in Columbus.
Yeah, that's great, Ben. And I'm glad you mentioned the Women in Analytics Conference, which Reagan has put on, and is really incredible to see what she and others have built around it. But Jay, you recently with your Test City USA literally sat down to document some of this and talk with some leading startups, leading venture capitalists in town. What did you learn through that process, and what were the messages you were hearing?
Well, I want to start by saying that one of my biggest regrets and failures of that film is that we didn't get Ben in the film. Because when we talk to cities around the country, and I mean that completely genuinely, because when we talk to cities around the country, community organizing is one of the most important elements of growing a startup ecosystem. And over time, over a long enough time period, just about any city has a community organizer who will pick up the flag and run with it for a couple years, and people will look back on that as like this golden age, but it's a mostly thankless job, and people burn out. They don't have a way to like really protect the capacity and the energy they're putting into that, because they're either building their own company a lot of times, or it's not aligned well with their full-time role. And so it just doesn't last over the long term. And we've seen those people come and go in Columbus too. I'm one of them. But when you have guys like Ben and Dan Rockwell and Brian Zerker and some of these people who are just there over the long term, like really continuing to bring people into the fold, to Ben's point, and make sure that people are included, it's so powerful for the entire ecosystem long term. And I wish there was a better model for cities to incentivize and recognize and compensate that behavior, because it has such a big economic impact. But yeah, when we did the film, we have probably the first 30 minutes talks about some of that history, going almost back as far as what Ben was talking about into the late 90s, when people were beginning some of these meetup groups, out of like Resource Amirati, one of the tech groups kind of started there with a lot of the developers. it's really, really important. It's kind of the heartbeat of like what happens is when you have this community organizer role and this activity happening, those people are just really tapped in to like the most current, here's what company's doing well, here's what company's on the brink. They can help make connections between them and customers, or them and investors, or them and other founders. It's just this really important cohesive glue, and Columbus has done an incredible job of it because we just have champions like Ben and some of those other people I named to stick around and do it over the long term.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. And Tonja, as we go to you and hear your thoughts, I also think it's fascinating that, you know, your perspective, having been in cities across America doing this in multiple locations. And so you've had this really interesting ability to compare and contrast. And as you opened with, Columbus is the one that has most excited you and that you've loved getting involved in. So what is that like if someone who's more recently moved to Central Ohio and started working at one of those pillar institutions?
Well, my experiences in other cities are the technology executives are a lot siloed. And so the problems that they're working to solve for their organization or set of organizations is just kind of closed and kept to them within whatever circles they're in. What I found when I moved to Ohio, I didn't start out in Columbus, I started out in the Dayton area, was come to Columbus. Let's, you know, we know you're out there in Dayton is only an hour away, but we think you might want to meet this person or that person and come to this conference and this event and speak here and there. I really felt included from the beginning. And that was particularly exciting for me for so many reasons. Firstly, I'm not from Ohio and hadn't been here. And a lot of the people like Ben and others, Angelo that he mentioned, are kind of Ohio Tech staples. So the fact that they've been doing this for so many years, 20 plus years, did you say, Ben, you've been doing CIO Forum, and were so inviting to want to hear from me, and my perspective was just very encouraging. And then more so when you look across the technology executive landscape, you know, technology is becoming more diverse, but at the moment, when you look at, you know, CIO level and senior executive leadership, you don't see a lot of women and you don't see a lot of African Americans. So being an African American technology executive and one that was included from the beginning and not even from this area really just should tell you a lot about how inclusive Columbus is and Central Ohio is. And oh my, when I won Technology Executive of the Year for Central Ohio, I screamed, literally. If you were there, then you know, it was just, I couldn't believe that being so new to this phenomenal city, that my thought leadership and just my expertise was valued that much, that it wasn't kind of put into the networks that already existed, that they were willing to embrace a newcomer that much to award me with this. That just really speaks volumes that I can't form in sentences. So when I say that Columbus really is, and I'm from New York City, so I've lived in New York City, I've lived in Atlanta, Washington, D.C. area, Baltimore. I'm not speaking of small, I'm talking about, you know, the coastal areas that everyone always talks about they want to get people from. But I would say, you know, Columbus, we have everything we need here to continue to be a global world leader. And really what we need the most is what we have, and it's the sense of community and collaboration that's here. So I'm definitely home. I love it here.
That's great to hear. And Cheryl, as we get some of your thoughts on this, you know, everything community, all of this takes it all takes people, it all takes talented people. And Ohio State, which is one of Columbus's, Ohio's greatest resources, and such a important piece to it, because every year there's just incredible talent that keeps coming in and graduating. So what is it like being on the university side and working to help fill that pipeline and grow it and increase it?
Well, I love it, and really the fact that the Keenan Center serves, you know, the broad spectrum from faculty to students to alums are is a really differentiating factor. Most entrepreneurship centers are a little bit more siloed, and the faculty piece of the equation is with a tech transfer office, and then the student piece is in a different, generally like maybe the College of Business. Whereas the Keenan Center is a university-wide center, and we deal with all of these constituencies. And I think that that really helps cross-pollinate with the talent. So we have brilliant students, but they're also led by really brilliant faculty members. And it's just so fun to see how those interact. And I will say that inclusivity is a big piece of our entrepreneurship center. We have found that, and I know you all have too, that the most exciting ideas come from when you have a collision of different perspectives and different talents and different level areas of expertise. We find so much on on the edge between, say, engineering and medicine. That's just like a really good example of. So anytime that you can be cross-disciplinary, that you can, cut across genders or ethnicities to get different perspectives, I think that's just a natural part of entrepreneurship. And it's one of the things that I love about Ohio State is that we have such a diverse group of super talented folks. And I love the fact that, it goes from our undergraduate students who come in who are just full of excitement and entrepreneurship is something they really want to engage with, to working with grad students and postdocs who are starting to think, okay, how can the work that I've been doing, I can bring that and impact the world with it, to faculty who have spent 20 or more years of their life working on a cure for cancer or a new type of new type of battery, and to say, okay, how can we help them not give up their day job, but to bring their life's work to the market and to the world where it has impact. Those are some of the things that I think that Ohio State is really strong in, and one of the things that's very invigorating about working with such talented individuals.
That's great. Thank you. And in the chats, if people have questions or want to throw comments, a few have come in, but Elio Harmon of 614 Startups, another great example of an outlet that's helped amplifying some of this work and telling those stories. And also in their Black Tech 614 and the team behind that, there's just these incredible different organizations, some formal, and they're publishing under websites. And Ben has a great newsletter that comes out once a week. So people haven't seen that or checked that out, Tech Life Columbus and others, but there's just such incredible energy behind it, which is a good entry point into another topic, which as we're seeing, and we talked a little bit about talent and coastal hubs and things like that, but throughout this COVID-19, these past few months, a big thing that's been popping up, especially in the tech sector, is obviously remote from work. And a lot of these companies, Twitter, Square, Shopify, Facebook, some others, are becoming, much more open, and some are even going to fully remote work, which gives people an opportunity to work for any business in the world, in theory, and live wherever they want. And so that's an interesting question that, Ben, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but one of the interesting things I've seen recently in OhioX is, as I've been talking to and hearing from a lot of former Buckeyes that grew up here, went to school here, but then left to go to a New York City, a Seattle, a San Francisco, and maybe they've been out there 5, 10, or 15 years, and they're interested in potentially coming back. What would that message that perhaps people on here would send, and what are maybe even a thing or two that our communities can do to help invite them and recruit some of this boomerang Buckeye talent back home?
Cheryl, I think you should take this one first as the resident Buckeye. What's Ohio State doing to spread the word? Like, you have the world's largest alumni association, right?
Yes.
Like, it's not even close.
We have a brand new, super terrific president of the Alumni Association. So that is just, I think we're just really at the tip of that. The fact that we are able to engage and people are much more receptive to engaging via Zoom and not, I was just speaking with a VC group that's headquartered in Boston, and their entire portfolio up until now has been Boston centered. And because of this, they're all of a sudden realizing that they can do due diligence across the country, and they don't have to limit themselves to the Boston area. And I think that'll have a lot of repercussions with regard to compensation systems, transportation systems. I mean, this is a systemic sort of change where if all of a sudden you can live anywhere that you want and work for whomever you want, I think we're going to see it's going to be a big currents that you're going to see of change that we're going to date back to this period. And we have a concerted effort. The Boomerang Buckeyes are definitely something that we look for. We recruit. We have LinkedIn pages that try to appeal to Buckeyes who are looking to come back and work here, or to just engage with Ohio State, even from where they are on a technology perspective. So again, I think that this, despite all of the horrific downsides of this awful pandemic, if that long term, we're going to see some nice opportunities that come out of this.
I think, I totally agree. I think there's been significant. One of the things that folks said is we have a strong ecosystem here, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're in a remote world, it is harder to plug into an ecosystem. And the more you plug into an ecosystem that is already willing to lean in and talk about, so there is sort of the balance of the online component, but there's a huge sort of like emotional component, like you're part of a group of people that fundamentally believes in collaborating. That means there's more growth opportunities for you fundamentally, right?
I can't agree with you more.
Right. I mean, so I think that's part of the messaging is, yeah, you can work anywhere, but can you work anywhere and plug into an ecosystem quickly, right? How many of us have moved to a new city and it's a cool city, but I don't know anyone, right? Who calls me, right? No one, right? So it doesn't matter where you live. What matters is that people reach out to you. Because if you don't know what you don't know, then who are you going to talk to? And so I think that's part of the messaging is we have incredible companies here. We got $1.5 billion in VC that's shown up in the last couple of years, right? We have a strong ecosystem around startups, and we have a balanced point of view regarding what makes a great community. And you have folks who want to be part of the community. If that's important to you, great. If you're a prepper and you just want to be out in Montana, that's okay too. It doesn't matter, right? But most of us at some point want to be part of the community, especially I think there's a huge campaign for everyone who is a parent who's got a 20 to 30 something that is going to get married and have kids. Tell your kids, work for a Columbus company, because at some point you're going to want to come home, right? I think just that we could double the size of Columbus just with that campaign.
Well, it happens so much already, and I think one of the things that's really valuable about our ecosystem, and something that we talk a lot about at the Keenan Center, is that we create multiple doors for people to walk through. There's not just one door that everybody has to walk through the same door, and therefore you only get kind of one traffic stream. I think that we have a lot of different doors that invite people from all different backgrounds to enter. And then once we're all inside, we're a big community.
Tonja, were you going to jump in there?
I was. So what I think the opportunity is here for Columbus is that regardless of where people are located, if they have an affinity for Columbus and want to be a part of the community, the fact that collaboration tools are proliferating across various industries, whereas once it was kind of like just work related. But as we have begun to use these collaboration tools like Zoom, Teams, Meet, name the tool, just for things like happy hours now, it's becoming more commonplace for people to be here and there. So the opportunity for Columbus is if we can figure out how to take the community that we have and virtualize it so that we are attracting people from across the country just by the virtue of exposure to who we are and who we are fundamentally as a community, I think that organically will begin after this whole thing is cleared up. Organically, people will want to continue to be a part of what we have here, which is something very, very special. So juxtaposing the collaboration tools, but using them in a more community-oriented way.
Jay, anything to add from your perspective, especially as again, some of these really big tech companies that I'm sure you know folks at are kind of making people real estate free agents.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing people like talk about loudly and beginning to leave areas like the Valley because they're like, I'm paying so much money to live with 6 people in a very small place. What am I doing? And if they can work for the same companies they're working for somewhere else, awesome. But we've started to see more of a wandering eye of people looking back towards their home communities anyway. So at the end of the day, I think most of this is just, if you live in Columbus, you know, being an advocate for your home city, because any big change just starts with a couple of people, right? Ben talked about the $1.5 billion or however much Drive Capital is putting under management now. That started with a couple of guys who moved out, came here, started this firm. They've moved multiple companies here now. They kind of birthed Root out of that place. Like, those are huge landscape shifting things that came from a couple of people, a few relationships, a bunch of conversations. We don't necessarily need to move 200,000 people here. We need to, you know, make Columbus have a great reputation in the eyes of some people who are ambitious and trying to make some big things happen. And Columbus could be a place to do that.
That's great. Thank you. As we're starting to wrap up, which we're already starting to approach an hour, which just has flown by, so I've really enjoyed all the insights shared thus far. One of the Q&A submitted from Rich Granger is he asked, what sectors do you predict will drive innovation and growth in Central Ohio, the Columbus community, over the next 10 years? Ben, do you maybe want to start with that?
Sure, absolutely. I think we'll continue to see fintech continue to grow. I mean, that's sort of, you see the roots and folks. I think the state has a pretty aggressive effort around attracting fintech companies to Ohio. So I think we're going to see a reshaping of the financial industry. We've got a company called Upstart. Right? They relocated from California here because they saw the talent here associated with insurance, and so I think that's strong. I think we're going to continue to see the health tech in sort of the couple worlds, right? We already see a nationwide children's hospital, which are gene therapy. And recently there's a company called Forge Biologics who just raised $40 million around gene therapy. We're going to see an explosion around sort of customized gene therapy and the knowledge base that's here. Because if you think about it, the amount of health systems we have here to do and sort of research is so strong that health tech, and from that perspective, and then health tech that has to do with a couple of perspectives of how do we reduce the friction. So in sort of the health sort of payer to provider sort of system with companies like CoverArm, we're going to continue to see, I think, those kind of companies, just because there's such a need to deal with our health. And then the two other components would be, I think, because Columbus is home to so many enterprises that, Chase has 10,000 people sitting in Polaris, right? The kind of work we do that this community does in terms of scale, in terms of security, in terms of analytics, blows away most regions in the country, right? So if you're talking about, I got to serve 1 million people at scale, it's got to be at 7 by 24, and it's got to be able to deal with attacks from all over the world. That is like big iron, big scale. In that you got to have a critical mass to actually solve those kind of problems. We're going to keep growing in enterprise sort of like security and analytics space here. And we could talk further, but I believe that Ohio is America's data corridor for lots of different reasons. We could talk about that, but it's going to blow up.
That's great. And kind of around the data, which is, at least a similar word. Out of New Albany, Facebook just opened up a massive data center. Google and Amazon, they're doing similar things, and it's so interesting where that is. But Cheryl, maybe if you want to weigh in with your prediction for the next decade, but also I'm sure it's interesting in your work seeing what types of businesses and ideas are resonating with students and what they're thinking of. Because I would probably take a 22-year-old's imagination over mine at this point to kind of see where their the work of students is trending.
Well, I will say that Ben has a great sense of the pulse of where technology is headed, and he's right on in terms of the work around data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cybersecurity. All of those are very impactful across a number of different platforms and industries and businesses. So it's not just the fintech companies of the world that can use these. These are impacting all sorts of things like car manufacturers and materials makers and logistics suppliers. I mean, it is, it really, I think that's one of the things that is so compelling about those areas, is that they impact so many different industries, and really works well with a Midwest-based core, manufacturing and service environment, because I think we really are, Columbus particularly has a good mix of both, really can serve both. So I think Ben nailed it as to where we see this headed.
Tonja, what does the future of insurance hold for us, and what are some of the interesting things happening in that space? Because that's another area, financial services, insurance. There's such a rich history of that in Columbus.
I think what we're starting to see is a more consumer-driven experience for insurance companies. So whereas insurance companies have been very traditional in the past in leading internally, I think we're going to be a lot more reactive to consumer preferences. And the exciting thing that's happening here at Nationwide is that Nationwide and other insurance agencies are realizing that they're technology companies first. So really, technology is the driver for everything, every product, the delivery, how you are analyzing the product, the viability of the product. And so really we're seeing the phenomenon across any industry of a flipped model, I believe, where from the inside out, where technology used to be a support for organizations, technology is now the engine. We're all technology companies. And so you're going to see some of the lagging industries like insurance, like higher education, like healthcare, embrace the fact that you're really not a university, you're really not an insurance company, you're really not a hospital, you're a technology company that delivers X, Y, and Z services. And that is why I'm so happy to be doing this at this time in my career.
That's terrific. Thank you. Jay, what does Test City USA Part 2 look like if you're making that 10 years from now?
Wow. That's a very interesting question. So my favorite thing about the film is that I think 10 years from now, it'll be a really interesting time capsule. Like, that's what I hope to look back on 10 years from now and be like, wow, what an awesome moment to capture on film. I think we look a little bit more like Los Angeles, where they've had just an explosion of venture capital firms, just a lot more firms deploying capital. If I think about Columbus as a city for venture activity and venture investment, it kind of falls at the bottom of a top 10 list if you look nationally, and that top 10 cities you can name really quickly with San Francisco, New York, Boston, Austin, Chicago, Minneapolis. Like, you're already at 6 there, and then you can kind of start to argue where the next 4 fall in line with each other. I would say that Seattle, Los Angeles are there also. So Columbus is trying to climb into that sort of tier, and Los Angeles went from something like 12 venture capital firms to 120 in a matter of a couple of years, as per one of the guests we've had on the show. But Columbus isn't even really at the 12 point yet. We only have a handful. And so I hope, our geography really plays a factor in people saying we want to have a more location agnostic approach. And Columbus just makes really smart sense to plant our flag, which is one of the core reasons that drive us here.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. As we're wrapping up, we'll do a quick one. If people want to go, we'll go Ben, Cheryl, Tonja, Jay. Where can people follow you on LinkedIn, Twitter, websites? Plug whatever you'd like, and we'll wrap this up.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for having me. I got to plug my day job, which is a company called COVAIL. So if you are an enterprise looking for how to automate using machine learning, AI, at the end of the day, reduce cost for your enterprise, and you want to reduce the risk associated with cyber, call me. I'm easy to find. Ben Blanquera. I'm on and then the easiest thing to do in terms of resource for Tech Life is go to meetup.com, look up Tech Life. sign up to be part of that meetup, and then you'll automatically get a whole set of links associated with newsletters and things that help you become informed, because the starting point of changing and creating opportunities is being educated. So I encourage you to get educated and get plugged in.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Cheryl?
So if you're interested in engaging with the startup ecosystem in Central Ohio and the state, I'd encourage you to get in touch with me, because we are always looking for talent. We're looking for people to run startup companies. We are looking for interns to work at startup companies. We're looking for people to serve as mentors to our startup companies. So the bigger our community, the better. So really would encourage you to get in touch. You can reach me at turnbull.58@osu.edu.
Terrific. Thank you. Tonja?
I think we all know that Nationwide is on your side. And so just really excited about a lot of the evolution of Nationwide, especially within Nationwide technology. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see the cutting edge technologies that we are emerging and evolving in, all the things we talked about, AI, data analytics, machine learning, to power the insurance products and all the other products that we are offering. So really happy to be a part of that. And also, I also like to talk about the workforce of the future. Again, in my role, leading that here at Nationwide, would love to engage. Tonja, that's my Twitter, Tonjia. That's the benefit of being an early adopter. And on LinkedIn, Tonja Coverdale. So just like it's spelled, Tonja Coverdale, and please ping me. Thanks.
Thank you. Jay?
Hey, most relevant, if you want to get a look at the podcast, you can do that at upside.fm, and our film about Columbus, Test City, USA is at upside.fm/film. Would love for you to watch that and give me some feedback. We give 50% of proceeds to We Feed Columbus, which is a nonprofit supporting families and local restaurants. So that's the best place to go. I'll put it in the chat right now. You can find me at Clouse everywhere else.
Perfect. Well, thank you to everyone who's been on here. For those that don't follow us on LinkedIn, we're just at OhioX, but we've tagged everyone who's been on today. So that's an also good, easy way if you want to go connect with them on LinkedIn. Also want to thank HMB for their sponsorship of this Tech Tour series, making it possible. Our panelists, thank you so much for sharing your work, sharing what you've been building and what we have to come. As I mentioned, this Tech Tour continues. This is number 3 of 10. So next week we'll be in Dayton and then Cincinnati. You can go to ohiox.org/tech tour to learn more. We certainly hope that you'll join us at other stops in other cities across the state. But for now, that is it. Thank you very much. We appreciate everyone's time, and have a great Wednesday, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Together.
Bye-bye.
You're Jay. Hey, Cheryl. See you.
Bye.
You guys.